All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off while folks filter in. Welcome everyone to the Introduction to Regenerative Organizations webinar by Rhythm. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us here today. My name is Lottie. I'm joining this call from Boulder, Colorado. I'm a member of the Rhythm team, and I'm joined by a few other Rhythm team members. We have Tracy here, we have Jen here, as well as our presenter, Trey. So today we're going to introduce you all to the concept of regenerative organizations. And for those of you who may already be familiar with us, we'll be introducing you to Rhythm's philosophy and framing on it. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, Rhythm is a design and management firm focused on revealing potential in people and in organizations. So we work with organizations, networks, communities, and individuals, offering a range of support from one-on-one operational design and management support to many digital kind of do-it-yourself tools, workbooks, and online courses that can help you begin the necessary shifts in mindset, beliefs, and behaviors that are the foundation for adopting a more regenerative approach to work. So today you begin your regenerative journey with this introductory webinar, or for those of you who have been to a few of these, you deepen in your regenerative journey. And I'm excited to hand things over to Trey Cates. He's the founder of Rhythm and one of our managing partners, who will be presenting today.
Thank you, Tay, and welcome everyone. Glad you are all here. I do see some familiar faces or names in exchange of your faces. And so it's great to see some people who are looking to see if there's anything new I have to say. And of course, there's always things that are evolving and changing. But as Tay said, my role here with the organization is to just continue to provide an opportunity for discovery around how we could shift our current design into something that has more life. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of presenting the why behind that, and then get deeply into some of what we offer as a part of that process, and hope that it's helpful for you. And on that journey to bringing more life to you, your teams, and the organizations that you're a part of. So I'm going to share my screen, and we will begin this process. Maybe a thumbs up from somebody that they can see this. Awesome, great. Thank you. So one of the things we're going to do is just talk about the state of organizations today, what our unhealthy relationship with work actually looks like, how we can bring a living systems approach to this design, and then maybe have some conversation with everyone as a result of the process. But I'm going to start with a really important question that is stimulated by Annie Dillard's, who was a Pulitzer Prize winner, and some of you author and people would know her well, when she said this: how we spend our day is, of course, how we spend our lives. And that is a profound insight into how we prioritize, how we invest our time in the things around us. And so I'm going to begin with this question: how much time does the average person spend in an organization? Some of you may have thought about that. Some of you may have never considered what that looks like. But interestingly, when we really began to recognize how much time an individual spends in an organization, we began to ask ourselves, wow, now how can we use that time in a way that brings more life to us and brings more life to the relationships that we have? 90,000 hours is spent, roughly. And most people estimate it's 1/3 of someone's life. Now, when you think about someone's full life, another third is they're sleeping. So in essence, half their awake time they're spending in the workplace, and the other half they're spending in other things that they see as important. So in light of that, it actually begs a lot of questions and some things that we should consider, which is that state of organizations that they're participating or they're a part of something that's regenerating life, or is it degenerating it? You know, as we see this office that we're looking at on the screen and the offices that we've been a part of, or the Zoom calls now that we've been a part of over the last couple of years, we really want to ask ourselves, are we regenerating or degenerating the health and the potential within those systems? And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, because for the most part, my experience, and I'm sure yours has been the same, the majority of organizations aren't designed to enhance health and potential. And so what we find is an enormous amount of challenge and tension in organizations that are a design issue. We see that the disengagement rate is so substantially high, especially in the US, that we see a trend and a continued trend, and COVID has enhanced this trend towards people wanting a different experience. So much so that the CEO, Jim Clifton of Gallup, said this: roughly 7 in 10 people are struggling or suffering rather than thriving in their overall lives. 80% are not engaged or actively disengaged at work, and that it's costing the global economy 10% of the GDP, $8.1 trillion. And they also went to identify what well-being is, and I love the research they've done. They've identified it in a few different areas: physical, purpose, social, financial, and community. And this, on the right side of the screen, I really want to highlight this. Only 7% identify as thriving in all 5 of those elements. 7% of the global population. We should ask ourselves, is this thriving, not thriving, limited to just people in the workplace? It's actually not, because we actually see it in a lot of living systems, from upcoming generations to our planet. Diversity. I think the diversity index is an incredible index that tells us what's happened to diversity over the last 50 years, and that we've lost anywhere from 48 to 66% of the diversity on our planet. I don't think that is a surprise to most. But why is that happening? Why is it that our economic system incredibly focuses and provides value to the upper echelon, to the extent that one person can be worth as much as an entire nation? And that we know that infant mortality to life expectancy, race predicts how well we will do in society. And why is that the case? We believe all of this is coming from how we've designed our engagement, the workplaces that we're a part of, the institutions that we're part of, the communities that we're a part of. So we began to ask deeply this question: is this truly a design issue? And I think it is. I think we have continued to take this square peg and put it in a round hole and expect that we can get real impact. And I think there's some challenges with that. So what does that look like? Well, I think it comes down to how we address 2 key things. One is, when we think about the problems and the challenges that we have in our society, there really can be seen in these 2 different types of problems. One is a complicated one, and one is a complex one. And the complicated ones, we've had an enormous amount of success around. We've been able to send somebody to the moon. We've been able to design technology, very clear inputs, a series of steps, and we can replicate it. We can predict it. But when we think about complexity, it's about a lot of dense interdependencies. And then there's some nonlinear change. It's not a direct line from A to B. And then it gets quickly unpredictable. And actually, we don't have to look so far as to see COVID as an example of that. But when we think about complicated, we've had success around that, and it really is limited to things we make, because that's what a complicated process design does, is it allows us to understand those inputs, clearly define them, and then replicate it. But complexity is really about how we manage things. And most likely, we'll learn today and we'll continue to reinforce is that all living systems are complex systems. And so in that, we begin to recognize when you see this, is this complicated or complex? It's a series of steps, it's instructions, right? This is a complicated problem, right? Or opportunity. But when we think about this is not about series of steps. This is about complexity. And when we begin to mix a solution for one and apply it to another, we create a lot of different unintended consequences. So let's just talk about this in just 60 seconds. This complicated approach was really birthed in Newton and all these great thinkers that came out of the Renaissance. And it was the philosophical foundation for much of our Western civilization. And those laws that Newton described and we've applied were so convincing that we began to apply it to areas that probably needed a different approach. And actually, more than probably, we will say it absolutely needs a different approach. When we're using that scientific reductionist mechanical approach to all aspects of human endeavors or behaviors, I think we began to recognize its limitation. And that limitation was not seen immediately. And so you see some really incredible research that was done by Frederick Taylor. This was in 1909, and he actually wrote this whole book on the principles of scientific management. So he took all of this Newtonian reductionist scientific method and developed this entire scientific approach on how we take management in our organizations to this next level. And he would go on to say in this treatise, to prove that the best management is true science, resting upon clearly defined laws, rules, and principles as a foundation. And he was talking about these Newtonian ways of seeing the world, that things could be defined, replicated, and then guaranteed outcomes. And so it made some profound insights into, as we saw things like the involvement of innovation that happened with Ford and other automation. But one of the things that he said in this treatise is one of the very first requirements for man who is fit to handle a pig iron as a regular occupation is that he shall be so stupid and so phlegmatic that he more nearly resembles in his own mental makeup the ox than any other type. It was a degradation of who people were as a means to be able to automate and commoditize this approach, which is the natural outcome of a mechanistic design. So what has become the most dominant metaphor we use to describe organizations because of that process? It's the machine. Organizations as machines, using cogs to produce better profits, to 5 ways to run your company like a well-oiled machine, to all things around continuous improvement, to even our understanding of Kaizen, which is a Japanese term for continuous improvement, events to continue to fine-tune the essence of that machine. But it didn't stop there. We saw our schools, our economies, and even our educational systems as machines. And this begins to become troubling because then we began to see the human body as a machine. Think of yourself as a machine operating within a machine and know that you have the ability to alter your machines to produce better outcomes. This resulted in change in language. Language began to describe everything. Even today, I find myself saying to people, I don't have bandwidth for that, as though there is a limited amount of what that is in the form of this virtual, zeros and ones mechanistic approach, or that we need to move the needle on something, right? So those descriptions, those designs, those metaphors have infiltrated all aspects of our society. And then we even hear and see the satire with something as incredible as this, to say, just pay me your money and hop right on board. So they clambered inside. Then the big machine roared and it clunked and it bonked and it jerked and it burked and it bopped them about, but the thing really worked. Then the plain belly snitches popped out. They had stars. They actually did. They had stars upon stars. And that's how we've operated our lives, is to believe if we just get people designed in the right role with the right cog within the right machine, then it's all going to work. The machine is a structure that uses power to apply force and control movement to perform an intended action. That's actually what a machine is. Now, look what happens when we apply this definition to an organization. An organization is a structure that uses power to apply force and control movement to perform an intended action. That is how most people feel. That is how nature feels when we try to apply force upon her and control her to get an intended action right out of it, some kind of outcome. And that's how we have designed all of our institutions and our organizations. So when we apply a machine design, it engineers this idea of best practices, that everything is the same and we just need to adopt it. And then that enforces these prescriptive structures where everybody needs to look the same, taste the same, are the same. But when we apply that, it is all about control, because we believe with that we can gain some kind of outcome. And that's what happens in our machine designs. And so when we think about what we're monitoring, when we think about a machine, we're monitoring productivity and output and efficiency. That's the only thing you monitor in a machine. You could care less about the quality of the health of a machine. The reality is you want it to produce more. And so if a part doesn't work, you replace it, right? And you may improve it, but it's all based on more productivity and more efficiency. Now, when we think about how that's been applied, even Einstein says this, that when we're talking about a phenomenological complexity, when we think about applying the scientific method, in most cases it fails. And he uses the weather as an example of that. So even the greatest scientists in the world realize the limitation to a complicated approach. We can apply it to how we build and manufacture things, but we cannot apply it to a living system and to the complexity that we see around us. So when we think about complicated, it is appropriate for machines. But when we think about complexity, it is about a living system. It is about us as social beings, and it's about the environments that we live in. So we want to shift. So let's shift to life as a metaphor versus seeing the machine as a metaphor. So we were inspired and have really taken a lead from many people who have been doing work like this for many years. But we've taken an extra attention, we paid attention to the systems view of life, which was really the work of Montarana and Varela, which are from the Santiago School. And they did, one of the first scientists that did a holistic approach to studying what is life. And we see this as a bridge of moving from this mechanistic design and approach to something that's more in alignment with some of what we see is some traditional wisdom that may have come out of indigenous cultures or spiritual traditions as a means to see a movement towards this more living systems approach. But in their research, they examined all the chemical and material pathways within the simplest bacteria. And in doing so, they began to recognize and notice a few things. And the one thing they did is everything that the cell needed was maintained within and generated within the cell, within that cell wall. And so they began to recognize that the defining aspect of life was this ability for self-maintenance and self-regeneration, all the way to the point of where they actually coined the term autopoiesis, which we love, which is this idea of self-poetry or self-making. And we believe as we move towards a new way and approach for organizations, that it's more in line with this self-making and self-poetry, this self-regeneration, than it is with this mechanistic design. And so we see this, life is an organized system capable of maintaining itself within a boundary of its own making, and that its own making is and can be regenerative. And that living is regenerative and regenerative is living. And that complexity in essence is all living systems. And we need this kind of approach versus the mechanistic one. And so what they decided, or what they found out, that the principles that came out of this research was some really incredible things. One was not this idea of regeneration or life wasn't located in any one place. It was dependent upon all the interconnected relationships. And that life itself was actually an emergent property of all the aspects of the cell. And that all aspects of the cell had this autopoietic ability, so that there were actually life within life as a part of its design, or what we call wholes within wholes. And so we've pulled from that some principles that we feel like have really shown up to give us insight into how we could take a different approach in terms of organizations, where we spend a third of our life, and even how we can apply to our lives outside of that, in our communities or in our families. And that is, we recognize that life is holistic. It's inherently holistic. And that for us to design it in silos and in machines is actually sucking life out of it. And that life is so inherently, excuse me, it's inherently enabling conditions that allow for us to value the relationships that's needed within that system. So we see the deep interdependence that we need to have across an entire ecosystem of clients and suppliers and partners, and even competition. And that within a living system, things are unique. And we need to find ways to give voice to that uniqueness and foster what we call that genius in everybody in an organization or in a community. And that we need to maintain a dynamic balance with these ever-changing conditions. So how do we design for that change? How do we design for flexibility and the opportunity to adapt and then evolve into a better form for the future? And that we see in life, there is no centralized control. You can't put your finger on it. And so what can we do to mimic that kind of design and allow for a redistribution of power and decision-making and structures to be more resourced across an entire organization? And that all of these systems and life itself is designed to create life. So growth and health are an intimate part of that design. So it's intimately developmental as a part of that. So these are the principles that we use when we think about shifting to a life-centered or a living systems approach. And even some of the greatest designers of the 20th century, Buckminster Fuller said, work with life-centered principles and the universe pitches in to help. I think when we think about designing in a machine, we're sucking life out of things. But when we think about, when we're talking about complexity, when we're thinking about life-centered principles, it actually inherently creates the conditions for life. And what can we do to continue to align around that? So when we need to recognize that if we're going to use principles, we need a new kind of framework to manage complexity. It can't be what we've done in the past. And so we are introducing this idea that health and abundance should be brought into this new frame of management. It shouldn't just be about productivity and efficiency. We need to design with health in mind as a means to create the conditions for unlimited potential and abundance. And so that means we spend a lot of time designing context, structures, and work to ensure it enables healthy conditions and that abundance becomes that natural outcome of that work. And so when we think about this, the living systems design, we think, informs a very different approach. It's a principled approach. And that principled approach facilitates the conditions for us to design frameworks that will actually create and regenerate health and potential. So when we think about this, it changes that now an organization doesn't have to be focused on force and control, but that it's a living system capable of maintaining itself within that boundary where abundance and resilience are recurring outcomes of its underlying health. So it's a big shift. So then when we look at them together, we see that machine designs, that engineering those best practices, prescriptive structures, but when you apply it to a living system, it degenerates the health of the system. When you think about a living systems design, it really is about informing, as we just said, that principle-based approach, which facilitates these flexible frameworks and regenerates the health of the system. Now, what's interesting is everything in orange needs an enormous amount of energy. It doesn't surprise and shouldn't surprise any of us that we have had to suck the life out of our living environment to be able to keep these machines running, right? But when we think about all of the energy needed in a living system, it's self-maintaining, it's self-regenerating. It can continue to be a cycle of continued growth. And we, meaning in Rhythm and others who are part of this cause and this deep mission and purpose, are all about supporting organizations, supporting systems in the shift in their perspectives and operations from that mechanistic design to a living systems design. So when we think about what happens when we apply principles to complicated systems, imagine taking a set of those 6 principles and going and trying to put an IKEA desk together. What does it do? It doesn't work. It creates an enormous amount of frustration, right? You're not going to be able to design an IKEA desk with principles, right? Because you're looking for a set of instructions. Now, when we recognize when we have the same thing happen, when we apply a set of instructions or best practices to complex systems, it does create an enormous amount of frustration, just like the other situation. But more importantly, what we need to recognize is the unintended consequences of using that kind of design. It degenerates the health of the system. It degenerates the health of the individuals, of the communities that we're a part of, because we're trying to treat people and the communities as machines, and they are not. And they will never fit into that round hole. So when we think about this, we're really recognizing these shifts and tensions, right? That we're moving from best practices to principles, allowing principles to guide our evaluation and design. We're moving from prescriptions to these responsive frameworks, where we're creating conditions for incredible innovation and incredible creativity, so that structures are designed to be flexible and adaptable and responsive to the context that you're in, and that we need to move from dominance to interdependence. You know, control is overrated. It is not serving us very well. And actually, I would say to most organizations and CEOs or senior management teams that think the existing system is serving them, we all know it's not. If we were all honest with ourselves, it's not. It's not even serving us when we think it is. There is no way that having over 50 to 60 to sometimes 70% of disengagement in organizations is a design that's good for us. What can we do to do it differently? So we look for cooperation And we look for that in and within our ecosystem. We know that this is a move from prediction to pattern, recognizing that we see in living systems patterns that we should be designing around, and we should be making decisions around, creating conditions for health and emergence. And that moving from extraction to equity is something that we deeply already are experiencing in ways that, there's nothing I could say today that would tell us how much more we need equity in our society and in our communities, and especially in our organizations. When we spend a third of our time there, it's got to be something that be meaningful and fulfilling, not something as a means to another end. And last, this idea of moving from centralized power to decentralized empowerment, that there needs to be more decision makers and that it needs to be distributed across an entire organization. So I'm going to leave you with this quote and then open it up for some conversations. And this is a famous system scientist, Danielle Meadows. And she said, "The world is a complex, interconnected, finite, ecological, social, psychological, economic system. We treat it as if it were not, as if it were divisible, separable, simple, and infinite. And our persistent, intractable global problems arise directly from this mismatch." Guys, we've taken an approach that's based on complication and we've applied it to complexity. And we have done a disservice to our families, to the communities that we're a part of. And there is a time for a better approach, and it is now. And so we're excited about being able to bring this kind of work to the world, be able to bring more health and potential, and be able to see even more creativity and innovation. So thank you for giving us a little bit of your time. And we'll start off with this question. What has shifted for you today in light of this conversation? And feel free to drop it into the chat or unmute and just share your thoughts.
Hi, Trey and team. Can you hear me okay? It's Jolene. Hi, Trey. I know we're going to be chatting Monday as well. So I work with a variety of different clients, and I just, all of them seem to be clamoring for the magic, recipe or the secret sauce to how can we transition out of our current environment, and especially given everything that's happened over the last 18 months, which has put it right in the front of our face. And it's too visceral for me anymore to just be able to say, let's just redesign your org, let's do this. So I'm looking for real ways, other ways that can align with their missions as businesses. So this just reignited it for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Jolene. Yeah, I think it is it's a challenging subject. I feel like there is no, and I know you know this, Jolene, there is no secret way to do this. Every organization is different. We're working with organizations in agriculture all the way to technology and in government and nonprofits, all saying, gosh, we can't keep doing it the way we've been doing it. I just had a pretty incredible conversation with probably one of the largest organizations in the world, and their conversation was based in the communications department. How do we take this kind of approach and roll it out across the entire organization? And what we tend to do is just encourage people to start small and say, what does it look like to create a core group of people who are exploring this as a means to be a strategic direction for the organization? And we're finding a lot of real energy around that. Don't immediately say, hey, we've got to adopt this across the organization. Let's identify areas where we can actually begin to test how this would work in our organizations. And I think there are some things that show up pretty quickly for people to utilize. But I don't want to minimize the fact that we're talking about a massive shift. And we are really committed to building bridges. And so sometimes that shows up in strategic planning. Sometimes that shows up in HR. Sometimes that shows up in a particular project where we use these principles in a framework to show how we could design differently. And in doing so, we've seen some real uptake in terms of the energy around this. And so that's my quick answer, Jolene, but we'll spend more time talking next week. Other questions or thoughts or shifts that you feel in this kind of approach?
Roger, did you have some thoughts? I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, I do. And the first is, could I talk to somebody rather than a nice picture of a waterfall?
Sure.
Can we take it off screen share?
Yes, there we go.
Yeah, great. What you've said is music, as far as I'm concerned. It's like a familiar song, but one that stirs me nonetheless. My interest is in governance at a government level as opposed to an organization level, and at least in an organization, I spent most of my life consulting to organizations, and at least in an organization, people listen. But in government, it's way out there somewhere that the risks are just too much for the people who are at the top of the pyramid. And so, that's what keeps me up at night. That's not to take away from what you're saying. And in fact, I'd like a conversation down the road about what we could do. But there's the irony of all this, in my view, is that there are millions upon millions upon millions of people who can hear this, but they're powerless to change it. And that interconnection, especially with the financial system for an organization, is, I've heard in my career people saying, I hear you, I hear what you're saying, but we have our shareholders or stockholders to satisfy. And so, and with the way that the compensation system is created, it's just too big of a risk to make wholesale change. So I think you're absolutely right. You have to start small with the entrepreneurial community as well as the teams within an organization. So I just wanted to validate what you're saying as far as I'm concerned. And I would like to talk further if we can set it up.
Absolutely, Roger. Thank you. And one of the things I will say that we're talking about, and we said it about the framework, is introducing health as a underlying process in an organization and in a government or a community has helped to switch and shift some conversations.
Yeah.
And I would say that we just did a little small project with the Commonwealth around them seeing health within their organization, not just in the public good. And that's a big shift. People beginning to recognize that if this is truly an ecosystem, then we should be thinking about health as its underlying design versus just that productivity and efficiency, which means, as you said, financial compensation and other structures will have to change. So thank you for that, comment. We'd love to talk further.
Okay.
Others, other comments? Yes.
So this is so exciting for me. I've been looking forward to this conversation this week, and it was like more exciting than I was excited. So it's great.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Roger, for your comments. And I wanted to just use one example and not talk all about myself. I'm supporting a group of people in an architectural firm to come up with their office work plan, and Steelcase has done a ton of research around the ecosystem of a workplace and how it can be resilient, and went over this with some of the team members on how to integrate that zone mapping on how adaptable we can be just in a space when we're working. So obviously the constructs can be like, you know, so broad and all encompassing like you've described. And on the simplest level, we might need a more comfortable chair to sit in because the living system knows what it needs in the moment that it needs it. And I just so appreciate this conversation. I'm a nonprofit leader and work in corporate for over 16 years. So I'm like so excited. I'm like celebrating here. And I don't know how I will stay connected, but I'm, you know, already using some of these principles. And now that you've given it a framework and an easy way of, my big question or my big comment, I guess I would say, is obviously you've avoided some of the controversial items, questions, equitable conversation by just using universal term. And those structures and systems have, you know, some of that control has so many challenges built in, right, that we've seen. So what's the relationship now of continuing to use the machinistic lean principles that have been so effective with the living system? So I want to see the relationship and the conversation, like you described the bridge, and I was like, I want to hang out there because I want to hang out in the juice of the transition, because that's like the engagement principle of like, how can we actually emerge together through this? Because it's painful. Like I work in an architectural firm where they're doing a lot of this and it's chaos. Like some people are like, why the hell are they considering every voice and considering us a whole? And then other people are like, well, this is amazing. And it's just chaos. It's just chaos. Because some people are ready early adopters. Some are like, what is this BS? So managing the chaos in the bridge for me is like, I'm like, I want to hang out there.
Yeah. Well, so you have so, I mean, I'm sure everybody else could say this too. You have so well articulated the challenge. I mean, it's beautiful to listen to you just describe where the tension is, and it's spot on. And it is messy. It is in creating conditions that you're like, okay, I'm not sure this is working. And what's the relationship here? And how do we manage that there? But that's what this is about, is beginning to shift that. So I'll use a specific example. I led a Kaizen event, so a continuous improvement event for a hospital that was demoing one, and they needed to move everybody to another. And this was in partnership with an architectural firm. And the intention was they were all about, okay, we do a traditional Kaizen event, all the points of continuous improvement, what we need to do. And I said, we're going to merge two things together. We're going to take some of those continuous improvement ideals, lean, that you've been so trained in, and we're going to begin to see them through the lens of an ecosystem and begin to offer the idea that health does exist in this ecosystem, and how do we create the conditions for it? And it was a beautiful process, and a process full of tension that allowed for people to recognize, gosh, if this is an ecosystem, and these are principles that we should be thinking about, that means our entire operational strategy should change. So what emerged, which was not planned in that whole meeting, 20 plus professionals across, from providers, doctors, administrators, what emerged in that whole process was we need to change our whole operational strategy, not just figure out how we put people in rooms functionally when this thing gets demoed. And that was a beautiful emergent process that if I had come in and said, you guys should change your operational strategy, they would have said, no way, what are you thinking? We just need to move people from point A to point B. But we designed a process that allowed for those things to emerge, where it was about them seeing all of it and us just facilitating that process and recognizing the important thing was all of that process that needed to happen. So it was in that bridge where this happened. And the CEO came and it was reported to, and he couldn't have been more excited about it. He was like, this is what we should be doing. And it just created an enormous amount of energy across this organization that hadn't been there for a long time. And that was just a small example of how I see these kind of things showing up. If we show up with full ideology, and this is how it has to be done, it actually creates barriers versus the ability to say, where are you? What's your context? How then can we understand it and then partner with you in that process versus, hook, line, and sinker, the way that typical things are both taught and introduced. So hopefully that was helpful in response to your situation.
Yeah, it's so powerful because I'm starting a business and I want to use this model. And then I have a yoga community that's a little older and so I'm meeting with someone tomorrow to chat just about this topic. She sent you guys to me and she said, okay, what does horizontal power structure feel like for us? That's what we're calling it. Meaning like we're a matrix or network of emerging leaders. And then how is our influence and impact creating the structure, because we don't know what that structure we want.
That is awesome. I love it.
Thank you. I don't want to take much more time.
I just wanted to follow up on that, if that's okay, Trey and Kat. So we had a meeting with one of our partners in Northern Partners today, and we were talking about a structure of something else and how the learning has to be in parallel, just like you're saying, Trey. Like you come in with like, this is how we're going to do it. And maybe Jolene, this is a little bit of what you were talking about too. But how much more fun is it just to create the conditions and then together see what emerges and then to be able to go from there. It's such that's what life is. Like that is you show up and you're like, we're not sure what's going to happen today, but let's see. And then everybody can feel that energy. So instead of saying, we're, like you said, Trey, and so many times this has happened, like, we're going to do all this change and everybody's like, barrier, no way, I'm not interested at all. And then you lose everybody versus like, let's just create these conditions and then see what emerges and then all experience that collectively together, not one person above the other, but just in collaboration. That's what it's about. And that why are we working if we're not working to be connecting more and more with each other as these things emerge, which then can give us all the abundance that we need. So, and it's messy and it's tension. There's a lot of tension, and I'm with you, Kat. It's like, I love that area. And then I also, the messiness of it, but it's also like really stressful sometimes because of the broad range of where everyone's at, you can be like full on with one person and then someone's like, what are you talking about? So that's where the community of practice comes in, and Jen manages that, where we come together and we actually can voice some of this, like, wow, I'm really feeling this tension. And then you can remind yourself, oh yeah, this is the way I want to be. Because in like the outside world where it's not necessarily practiced all the time, we can forget. So getting into community with us and like that, we do it with our own team. Like, whoa, today was hard, or I was dealing with this over here and I met this tension, and how do we support each other as we are, breaking down barriers by creating conditions. So I appreciated all that. So I so relate to all of that. So thanks for letting me share my thoughts.
Yeah, I just have like 2 words and I won't say much more. Safe space.
Yeah.
Thank you for creating it. And I want to create more of it.
Thank you.
Nadya,
Anybody
I know
else?
you had your hand up at one point.
Yeah, I drifted. Hi, everyone. My name is Nadya Rahali. I live in Atlanta. I work for the United Way, and I'm kind of like nonprofit hospitality. So we have a big conference center, which also houses our headquarters. And before the pandemic, it was just like, I really struggled to just see how our industry is so bad for the environment and like the events world and putting programs together, and how the consumers are like, there is just this toxic relationship with not enough and scarcity. And so anyway, I'm here to see who's here who want to work with me, or just kind of guide me in like I declared I will make a difference in the city, I will make a difference in the South, but it's not like, you know, the environment. No, it's really like regeneration, and it's coming back home, and it's like you said, livable spaces. So so I'm glad I found this community. I was just looking on Instagram, and then you guys popped in. So
Thank you, Nadya. That's beautiful, and I love the warmth that you emanate in terms of that just this deep connection, and it is. We really are looking to move everything from that transactional to this deep relational place. And so, yes, we will for sure reach out and love to find ways to connect with you to support you in that endeavor. So thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, again, I just want to say how much of an honor it is for you to take time out of your day. I do want to do a shout out to Lipa and Tarquin in Kenya. I see you guys. I love you guys. Thanks for being here. And thank you for all that you guys are doing in the world. You're here because you are thinking about these things, and we need more and more of you all. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're going to go ahead and share recording with everyone who signed up for this webinar. And as Trey said, we love to connect. So if you want to connect with the team, learn more about regenerative design principles, learn more about this approach, there's many ways for you to engage. You can reach out to us one-on-one at team@nrhythm.co. You can join us for one of our upcoming Design Lab workshops in September, as well as visiting our approach page on our website to see how else you can get started and joining this community and more conversations just like this.
I'd love to invite you guys to Clubhouse on Monday mornings. It's a 30-minute conversation and very relaxed, low key, but just a way to get some ideas flowing for the week that we might want to focus on. So we'll have more information on that, how you can be invited and join in.
Yeah, you will all get an invite to that because you're now part of our newsletter community.